The sound of shattering glass pierced the silence as Rebecca Harrington smashed the window with a fire poker, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. Freedom lay just beyond that jagged opening, but at what cost? 3 days a prisoner in her own home. 3 days since Walter Blackstone had declared she would be his wife, willing or not. The cool night air of 1878 Colorado brushed against Rebecca's face as she climbed through the window, careful to avoid the glass shards that gleamed like deadly stars in the moonlight. Her hands trembled as she hitched up her skirts, the fabric catching on the splintered wood frame. A sharp pain shot through her palm as a glass shard bit into her skin, but she didn't dare make a sound. Not with Blackstone and his men sleeping just down the hall. 23 years old and running for her life, Rebecca Harrington had never imagined finding herself in such a predicament. The daughter of a well-respected doctor who'd passed 6 months prior, she'd been managing their small medical practice in Silver Creek when Blackstone arrived. A cattle baron with eyes cold as winter and hands that grabbed what they wanted, he'd set his sights on her father's land and on her. Rebecca's boots hit the soft dirt with a muffled thud. She pressed herself against the side of the house, listening intently for any sign that her escape had been detected. Nothing but the distant hoot of an owl and the gentle rustle of aspen leaves. She drew a steadying breath, clutched the small bundle containing her most precious possessions, and ran. The darkness enveloped her as she fled across the moonlit yard toward the cover of pines that bordered her property. She dared not take a horse; the noise would surely wake Blackstone's men. On foot, she at least had a chance. Slim as it might be, Silver Creek lay 5 miles to the south, but Rebecca knew better than to head there. Blackstone practically owned the town marshal and half the businesses. No, her only hope was to reach the Campbell homestead, some 8 miles to the northwest. The Campbell family had been friends of her father's, and they might shelter her long enough for her to figure out what to do next. The rugged terrain grew steeper as she pushed deeper into the foothills. Her lungs burned with each labored breath, and her skirts, wholly impractical for this desperate flight, kept catching on branches and undergrowth. Still, Rebecca pressed on, driven by the memory of Blackstone's cruel smile as he'd announced their engagement to the townspeople 3 days ago, then locked her in her own home when she'd refused him. "You'll learn to appreciate my generosity," he had said, his fingers digging painfully into her arm. "A woman alone can't survive out here, and that land of yours is too valuable to waste on doctoring." The moon slid behind a bank of clouds, plunging the forest into deeper darkness. Rebecca slowed her pace, feeling her way forward, one careful step at a time. The sounds of the night creatures surrounded her, chirping insects, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. She strained her ears for the telltale sounds of pursuit, but heard nothing to suggest Blackstone had discovered her absence. Hours passed as she trudged onward, her initial burst of energy giving way to bone-deep weariness. Her throat was parched, and her empty stomach cramped with hunger. Dawn was still hours away when Rebecca reached a shallow creek that cut across her path. She knelt at the water's edge, cupping her hands to drink the cool, clear liquid. The brief rest renewed her determination, and she stood to continue her journey. That's when she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Panic surged through her veins. Rebecca scrambled up the embankment on the far side of the creek, her boots slipping on moss-covered stones. In her haste to put distance between herself and her pursuers, she failed to notice the steep drop just beyond the ridge. One moment she was running, and the next, the ground disappeared beneath her feet. Rebecca's scream was cut short as she tumbled down the rocky slope, her body bouncing painfully against stone and earth. She threw out her arms, desperately trying to halt her fall, but momentum carried her downward until she slammed against the trunk of a pine tree. Pain exploded in her ankle and side. The world spun around her, and darkness hovered at the edges of her vision. She lay there, dazed and hurt, listening to the sounds of horsemen drawing closer. They were on the ridge above, their lanterns casting eerie yellow light through the trees. Rebecca tried to push herself upright, but agony shot through her leg, forcing a whimper from her lips. She bit down hard on her knuckle to silence herself, spread out, A harsh voice Blackstone's foreman called out. She can't have gone far. Rebecca dragged herself beneath the low-hanging branches of the pine, ignoring the sharp needles that scraped against her skin. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared they would hear it. The minutes stretched endlessly as the men searched the area above. She held her breath as a horse and rider passed less than 20 feet from her hiding place. "Nothing down this way," a voice called. "Too steep. No woman in her right mind would try to climb down here. Keep looking along the creek," another replied. "She's leaving tracks a blind man could follow." The voices faded as the searchers moved away, following the creek in the wrong direction. Rebecca released the breath she'd been holding, but the relief was short-lived. She was injured, lost, and still miles from safety. And when daylight came, Blackstone would redouble his efforts to find her. She attempted once more to stand, gritting her teeth against the pain. Her ankle wouldn't bear weight, and a warm stickiness along her side suggested she was bleeding. Rebecca slumped back against the tree trunk, despair threatening to overwhelm her. She couldn't stay here, but neither could she continue on foot. As exhaustion and pain clouded her mind, Rebecca thought she heard the soft sound of approaching hoofbeats, different from the heavy tread of Blackstone's horses. These were lighter, more cautious. She froze, pressing herself deeper into the shadows beneath the pine boughs. The rider drew closer, moving slowly through the pre-dawn darkness. Rebecca glimpsed the silhouette of a man on horseback, his broad-brimmed hat outlined against the gradually lightening sky. He dismounted gracefully, tethering his horse to a nearby tree before dropping into a crouch, studying the ground. "Tracks lead right to the edge," he murmured to himself, his voice a low rumble that carried in the stillness. Then nothing. Rebecca remained motionless, scarcely daring to breathe. Was he one of Blackstone's men who had doubled back? But something about his methodical movements suggested otherwise. The stranger moved to the ridge and peered over the edge. In the growing light, Rebecca could make out the details of his appearance, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a sheepskin coat against the mountain chill. A rifle was slung across his back, and a star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "Hello," he called softly. "Anyone down there?" Rebecca hesitated. If he worked for Blackstone, revealing herself meant certain capture. But if he didn't, he might be her only chance of survival. The decision was made for her when she shifted position, and pain shot through her injured side, drawing an involuntary gasp from her lips. The man's head turned sharply toward the sound. "I hear you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm coming down." With surprising agility, he navigated the steep slope, using tree trunks and exposed roots to control his descent. When he reached the bottom, he paused, scanning the underbrush. "I'm Deputy Owen Irwin from Junction City," he announced. "I'm not here to hurt you." Junction City was nearly 30 miles away, well beyond Blackstone's immediate influence. Rebecca's hope flickered to life. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking, "help me." The deputy moved toward the sound, pushing aside the pine branches to reveal Rebecca's huddled form. His eyes widened momentarily before his expression softened with concern. He crouched beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You're hurt," he observed, taking in her torn dress and the blood staining her side. "What happened? Are you running from someone?" Rebecca nodded, wincing as she tried to sit up straighter. "Walter Blackstone," she managed. "He wants my land. He was going to force me to marry him." A shadow passed over Deputy Irwin's face. "Blackstone," he repeated, the name clearly familiar to him. "I've heard stories." He glanced up at the ridge. "His men were up there." "Yes," Rebecca confirmed. "They went north following the creek, but they'll be back when they realize I'm not that way." Owen Irwin nodded thoughtfully. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with kind eyes the color of a summer storm and a day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. "Can you stand?" he asked. Rebecca shook her head. "My ankle. I think it might be broken." Without hesitation, the deputy removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I'm going to lift you," he warned, giving her time to prepare before sliding one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. Rebecca gasped at the sudden closeness, but the warmth of his body against the morning chill was undeniably comforting. He lifted her with surprising gentleness, cradling her against his chest as he straightened. "My horse is up top," he said. I'll need both hands to climb. Can you hold on to me? Rebecca nodded, slipping her arms around his neck. He smelled of leather, coffee, and pine, an oddly reassuring combination. She closed her eyes as he began the difficult ascent, each step jarring her injured body despite his care. By the time they reached his horse, a handsome dun gelding that watched them with intelligent eyes, the eastern sky had lightened to a pale gold. Owen settled Rebecca carefully in the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm secure around her waist to keep her steady. "You're safe now," he whispered close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "I won't let him find you." Those simple words, "you're safe," broke something inside her. After days of fear and a night of desperate flight, Rebecca felt the tears she'd been holding back spill down her cheeks. She sagged against the deputy's solid chest, too exhausted and relieved to be embarrassed by her weakness. Owen guided his horse away from the ridge, taking a game trail that wound through the dense forest. They rode in silence for a time, putting distance between themselves and Blackstone's search party. The motion of the horse was painful on Rebecca's injuries, but she bit her lip and endured it, knowing each step took her farther from danger. "There's a line cabin about an hour's ride from here," Owen said eventually. "It belongs to a rancher I know. We can rest there, tend to your wounds." "Thank you," Rebecca whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "I wasn't looking for you specifically," he admitted. "I was tracking a horse thief who headed this way from Junction City, saw the commotion with Blackstone's men and decided to investigate. Lucky thing I did." Lucky indeed, Rebecca thought, though it felt like something more than mere chance. Perhaps her father was watching over her from beyond. "I'm Rebecca Harrington," she said, realizing she hadn't properly introduced herself. "My father was Dr. Harrington of Silver Creek." Owen nodded. "I've heard of him. Good man by all accounts. I'm sorry for your loss." "You know about my father. News travels, even 30 miles away, especially when it concerns a doctor as respected as yours was." He paused. "And especially when Walter Blackstone starts making noise about acquiring a property." They rode onward as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Rebecca found herself drifting in and out of consciousness, the events of the night and her injuries taking their toll. Each time she startled awake, Owen's arm would tighten reassuringly around her waist. "Still got you," he would murmur. "You're safe." The line cabin proved to be a sturdy one-room structure nestled in a small clearing. Owen helped Rebecca down from the horse and carried her inside, setting her gently on a narrow cot against the wall. The interior was simple but clean: a table with 2 chairs, a small cast iron stove, shelves stocked with basic provisions. "Wait here," he said unnecessarily. Where would she go? And returned to his horse. He came back moments later with saddlebags and a canteen. "Let's take a look at those injuries," Owen said, kneeling beside the cot. "I'm no doctor, but I've patched up my share of wounds." Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy. "The cut on my side first, I think. My ankle, I'll need to remove my boot." Owen worked with efficient care, helping her ease off her torn jacket and lifting the blood-stained fabric of her blouse just enough to reveal a long gash along her ribs. His touch was professional as he cleaned the wound with water from his canteen. "Not as bad as it looks," he assured her. "Bleeding's mostly stopped. Doesn't look deep enough for stitches." He found a first aid kit on one of the shelves and dressed the wound with practiced hands. When he turned his attention to her ankle, his expression grew more concerned. "This is swollen pretty bad," he said, gently probing the tender flesh. "But I can feel the bones are still aligned, likely a bad sprain, not broken. Still, you won't be walking on it for a while." Rebecca winced as he wrapped her ankle tightly with strips of cloth. "How long will we need to stay here?" Owen sat back on his heels, considering the question. "At least until tomorrow. You need rest, and we need to make sure Blackstone's men have moved on. Junction City's still a full day's ride, and you're in no condition for that journey yet." Junction City. "That's where we're going, unless you have somewhere else in mind. Blackstone has too much influence in Silver Creek, and if he's determined enough to force you into marriage, he won't give up easily." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I was trying to reach the Campbell homestead, but Junction City would be safer. I don't know anyone there." "You know me," Owen said simply, And our sheriff is a good man. He won't stand for Blackstone's kind of tactics." He paused, studying her face. "Do you have family anywhere who could take you in?" "No," Rebecca admitted. "My mother died when I was young, and my father was my only family. I was working as a healer like him. I have some savings, but we'll figure something out," Owen promised. He stood and moved to the stove. "For now, you need food and rest. I'll fix us something to eat." Rebecca watched as the deputy worked, his movements economical and sure as he kindled a small fire in the stove and set a pot of coffee to boil. There was something comforting about his quiet competence, so different from Walter Blackstone's blustering demands. "How did you become a deputy?" she asked, needing conversation to distract herself from the throbbing pain in her ankle. Owen glanced over his shoulder, a half-smile softening his weathered features. "Fell into it, I suppose. Was working cattle for the Double J Ranch when our town had some trouble with rustlers. Helped the sheriff track them down and he offered me a badge after. That was 5 years ago." "You prefer it to ranching, most days," he shrugged. "I like helping people, making a difference where I can." He certainly had made a difference for her, Rebecca thought as he brought her a tin cup of strong coffee sweetened with sugar. The warmth of the beverage spread through her, chasing away some of the chill that had settled in her bones during the night. "Thank you," she said, meaning far more than just the coffee. "For everything." Owen nodded, his eyes meeting hers. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Rebecca said quietly. "They wouldn't have." They shared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, supplemented with hard biscuits from Owen's saddlebags. As they ate, Rebecca told him more about her situation, her father's death, the struggle to maintain the medical practice alone, and Blackstone's increasingly aggressive pursuit of both her and her land. "He claims women can't own property without a husband," she said bitterly. "As if my father's will means nothing." "The law says otherwise," Owen replied, "but men like Blackstone think they are the law." "He announced our engagement at the town social without even asking me," Rebecca continued, the memory still raw. "When I refused him publicly, he had his men escort me home and post guards. Said he was protecting my reputation until I came to my senses." Owen's expression darkened. "That's not protection, it's imprisonment. The sheriff will want to hear about this." After the meal, exhaustion overtook Rebecca. Owen insisted she take the cot while he spread his bedroll on the floor. Despite her protests that he had already done too much, he was firm. "Sleep," he told her. "I'll keep watch." Rebecca wanted to argue further, but her eyelids were already growing heavy. The last thing she saw before drifting off was Owen sitting by the window, his rifle across his knees, his profile outlined against the afternoon light. She slept deeply, waking only once when a sound outside startled her. She found Owen still at his post, a finger to his lips warning her to be quiet. "Just a deer," he whispered after a moment. "Go back to sleep." And she did, feeling safer than she had in weeks. When Rebecca next awoke, the cabin was dark except for the glow of the banked fire in the stove. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself, before realizing that Owen was speaking quietly, his voice a low murmur from the corner where he'd spread his bedroll. "Just let me bring her in, Sheriff," he was saying, apparently rehearsing what he would say when they reached Junction City. "She needs protection, and we can sort out the legalities after. Blackstone's gone too far this time." He fell silent, and Rebecca closed her eyes, not wanting him to know she'd overheard. His concern touched her deeply. This man, who owed her nothing, had risked Blackstone's wrath to save her. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Rebecca's body ached from her fall, but the rest had done her good. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing as her injured side protested the movement. Owen was already awake, stoking the fire in the stove. He turned at the sound of her movement, offering a small smile. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Rebecca admitted, "but better. Thank you for letting me sleep. You needed it." He poured her a cup of coffee and brought it to her. "I checked outside earlier, no sign of Blackstone's men. If you're up to it, we should head for Junction City soon. The sooner we get you safely to town, the better." Rebecca nodded, taking a careful sip of the hot liquid. "I can manage." Owen helped her stand, supporting her weight as she tested her injured ankle. It hurt fiercely, but would bear minimal weight if she was careful. With his assistance, she made her way outside to attend to personal needs, then returned to the cabin to prepare for their journey. "I have a spare shirt in my saddlebags," Owen offered, noting the blood-stained condition of her blouse. "It'll be too big, but cleaner than what you're wearing." Rebecca accepted gratefully, and Owen stepped outside to give her privacy while she changed. The cotton shirt hung loose on her frame, but as he'd said, it was clean and smelled faintly of cedar and sunshine. By mid-morning they were mounted on Owen's dun gelding, Rebecca seated in front of him as before. The day was clear and cool, a perfect late autumn day in the Colorado mountains. Under different circumstances, Rebecca might have enjoyed the spectacular scenery, golden aspen groves interspersed with dark pines, rugged peaks rising in the distance, the occasional glimpse of a crystalline stream. They rode at a steady pace, Owen careful to choose the smoothest path to avoid jarring Rebecca's injuries. He kept them away from the main trails, sticking to less traveled routes that wound through the wilderness. "Tell me about Junction City," Rebecca said as they rode. "What kind of place is it?" "Growing," Owen replied. "Not as wild as it was when I first arrived. We've got a proper hotel now and a school, still rough around the edges but decent people for the most part." "And do they need a doctor?" The question slipped out before Rebecca could consider it fully. Owen was quiet for a moment. "As a matter of fact, they do. Our last physician left for Denver 6 months ago. Folks have to ride 20 miles to the next town for medical care." Hope stirred in Rebecca's chest. "I'm not a fully trained doctor like my father was, but I've been healing people since I was 16. I know herbs and setting bones and delivering babies. I could be useful there." "I've no doubt you could," Owen agreed, his voice warm with approval. "Sheriff Thompson's wife has been campaigning for a new doctor. She'd welcome you with open arms." They fell into comfortable conversation as they rode, sharing stories of their lives. Owen told her of growing up on a small farm in Missouri, of coming west after the war, claimed his father and older brother, of finding purpose in his work as a lawman. Rebecca spoke of learning medicine at her father's side, of her dreams to someday study formally at a medical college, of her love for the mountains and the changing seasons. As the day progressed, Rebecca became increasingly aware of Owen's solid presence behind her. The arm around her waist to steady her no longer felt like merely a necessary support, but a welcome comfort. She found herself noticing the timbre of his voice, the way he laughed softly at her wry observations about Silver Creek's more colorful residents, the gentle pressure of his hand when he pointed out a hawk circling overhead. They stopped at midday beside a small stream to rest and eat. Owen helped Rebecca down from the horse and settled her on a sun-warmed rock before retrieving food from his saddlebags. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and the last of the biscuits, Rebecca studied him openly for the first time. The deputy was handsome in an unassuming way, strong features weathered by sun and wind, intelligent gray eyes beneath dark brows, a mouth that seemed more inclined to smile than frown. His hands, she noticed, were capable but gentle, bearing the calluses of hard work. "What?" Owen asked, catching her gaze. Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am that you found me. Most men would have ridden past or turned me over to Blackstone." "Most men haven't met Walter Blackstone," Owen replied, his expression darkening. "I have. Once was enough to know what kind of man he is." "You've had dealings with him before," Owen nodded slowly. 3 years ago, he tried to expand his operations into Junction City territory, intimidated some smaller ranchers into selling. One man refused. Jacob Miller. Good man, salt of the earth. One night his barn burned down with all his winter hay inside. His cattle mysteriously broke through fences and scattered. He paused. "No proof it was Blackstone, of course. Never is." "What happened to Miller?" He held on barely. "Sheriff Thompson made it clear to Blackstone that his tactics wouldn't be tolerated in our jurisdiction. Things settled down, but Miller was never the same. Died last winter of pneumonia, worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep his place going." The story sent a chill through Rebecca. "And now Blackstone wants my father's land." "Prime location," Owen acknowledged. Good water rights positioned between his existing holdings, but it's more than that with you, isn't it, the way you described his behavior? He wants to possess me, Rebecca said quietly, like a trophy. The doctor's daughter as his wife would give him respectability he can't buy with all his money. Owen's jaw tightened. You're not a possession, and you won't have to face him again, I promise you that. They continued their journey after the brief rest, pushing steadily toward Junction City. The terrain gradually changed, the steep mountain slopes giving way to gentler foothills and eventually to rolling prairie. By late afternoon, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance. Junction City, Owen confirmed, following her gaze, will be there within the hour. Rebecca felt a curious mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that safety was within reach, apprehension about what awaited her in this unfamiliar town. And beneath it all, a strange reluctance to end this journey with the quiet deputy who had rescued her. As if sensing her thoughts, Owen said, Sheriff Thompson's wife, Martha, will help you get settled. She's a good woman, kind-hearted, and if you're serious about practicing medicine here, I know she'll support you. And you? Rebecca asked before she could stop herself. Will I see you once we reach town? The question hung between them for a moment. Rebecca felt Owen's chest expand against her back as he drew a deep breath. I'd like that, he said finally, his voice low. Very much. They rode into Junction City just as the sun was setting, painting the modest buildings with golden light. It was larger than Silver Creek, with a proper main street lined with businesses, a hotel, general store, saloon, and other establishments. People paused in their evening activities to watch as Owen rode down the street with Rebecca in front of him. He guided the horse directly to a solid brick building with Sheriff painted on a wooden sign outside. Before Owen could dismount, the door opened and an imposing man with a silver-streaked beard stepped out, his expression shifting from concern to relief. Irwin, about time you showed up, was about to send a search party. The sheriff's eyes moved to Rebecca. And who might this be? Sheriff Thompson, this is Miss Rebecca Harrington from Silver Creek, Owen said as he dismounted and helped Rebecca down. She needs our help. Walter Blackstone's been causing trouble again. Sheriff Thompson's bushy eyebrows drew together at the mention of Blackstone's name. Best come inside and tell me all about it, he said, holding the door for them. The next few hours passed in a blur for Rebecca. She told her story to the sympathetic sheriff and his wife, who arrived shortly after with food and clean clothes. Martha Thompson was exactly as Owen had described, kind-hearted and practical, taking Rebecca under her wing without hesitation. You'll stay with us tonight, Martha declared. No arguments. Tomorrow we'll see about finding you more permanent accommodations. When Rebecca mentioned her medical training, Martha's eyes lit up. The Lord does work in mysterious ways. We've been praying for a doctor. The building that housed the last physician's practice is still vacant, needs some cleaning up, but it could be yours if you want it. Sheriff Thompson nodded his agreement. As for Blackstone, I'll send a telegram to the federal marshal in Denver. Kidnapping and forced marriage are serious matters, even for a man of his standing. In the meantime, you'll be safe here. Through it all, Owen remained nearby, a steady presence that Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn to. When the sheriff finally suggested they all get some rest, Owen walked Rebecca and Martha to the Thompson home, a comfortable two-story house a short distance from the sheriff's office. At the door, Martha tactfully stepped inside to put the kettle on, leaving Rebecca and Owen alone on the porch. Thank you, Rebecca said, looking up into his face, now familiar after their long journey together. I don't know how to repay you for what you've done. No repayment necessary, Owen replied, his gray eyes warm in the lamplight spilling from the window. Just seeing you safe is enough. Rebecca took a step closer to him, her heart beating rapidly. Is it? Because I find myself hoping for something more than just gratitude between us. Owen's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I was thinking the same thing, he admitted. But I didn't want to presume. You've been through so much and we've only just met. Sometimes, Rebecca said, finding courage in his gentle touch, a person can know their own mind and heart quite clearly, even in unusual circumstances. Owen's smile deepened, creating crinkles at the corners of his eyes that Rebecca found utterly charming. In that case, Miss Harrington, would you allow me to call on you properly once you're settled? I would like that very much, Deputy Irwin. He bent slightly, hesitated, then pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Get some rest, he murmured. I'll see you tomorrow. Rebecca watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening street. Something warm bloomed in her chest, not the frantic fear that had driven her to flee from Blackstone, but a quieter, deeper feeling. Hope, perhaps. Or the beginning of something that might, with time and care, grow into love. 3 months later, Rebecca stood in her newly established medical practice, arranging herbs in glass jars along a shelf. Winter had settled over Junction City, wrapping the buildings in a blanket of pristine snow. The small bell over the door jingled, and she turned with a smile. Already knowing who her visitor would be, Owen Irwin stomped snow from his boots before entering, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. Doc Harrington, he greeted her, eyes twinkling. Busy day. 3 patients with winter coughs, 1 broken arm from a sledding accident, and Mrs. Peterson's new baby decided to arrive a week early, Rebecca replied, wiping her hands on her apron before moving to greet him properly. Owen caught her hands in his, drawing her close. You're making a difference here, he said softly. Everyone says so. I'm where I'm supposed to be, Rebecca agreed, resting her head briefly against his chest. The steady beat of his heart had become the most comforting sound in her world. Any news? The federal marshal sent word. Blackstone's been indicted on multiple charges, not just what he did to you, but land fraud and intimidation going back years. Seems once you stood up to him, others found the courage to come forward. Relief washed over Rebecca. The specter of Walter Blackstone had diminished over the months, but knowing he would face justice brought a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. There's something else, Owen continued, a note of nervousness entering his voice. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right moment. Rebecca's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. I'm not a wealthy man, Owen said, his eyes never leaving hers. I can't offer you grand houses or fine clothes, but I can promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you for all our days. Rebecca Harrington, will you marry me? Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. As Owen slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a tender kiss, Rebecca thought back to that desperate night 3 months ago, how she had fled into the darkness, fallen, and been found by this good, honorable man who had whispered, "You're safe," when she needed those words most. She had been running from a forced marriage then. Now she was embracing a future with a man who saw her as an equal, who respected her healing work, who looked at her with love rather than possession in his eyes. You know, she murmured against his lips, when you found me that night, I never imagined this would be where we'd end up. Owen smiled, his arms tightening around her. I think I knew even then. Something about you called to me not just because you needed help, but because somehow I recognized that you were meant to be in my life. Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting the window with delicate crystals. Inside the small doctor's office, Rebecca and Owen remained embraced, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds in the vast wilderness of the West, proving that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't gold in the mountains, but the heart of a person who whispers, "You're safe," and means it with every fiber of their being.